From organising accommodation to running the subs bench, sorting out and arranging team bonding sessions, and pretty much everything in between, there is no end to the job list of a team manager in the world of hockey. Join us across the next 2 weeks on Inside the Circle, the podcast, brought to you by our principal partner Vitality, as we uncover what really goes on behind the scenes during an international tour, as we are joined by Andy Halliday, George Pinner and Adam Dixon. Having worked together for well over a decade, there are plenty of hilarious and heartwarming stories over the next 35 minutes, so make sure you're paying full attention as you won't want to miss a moment. As explained in the introduction, today is all about the team manager, and who better to join us than the one and only Andy Halliday. And also with him is George Pinner and Adam Dixon. So very much looking forward to this. I know these guys have got a long history of working together, so this should be a fun episode. I guess starting with you, Andy, starting with the very basics for those who are listening and may not know exactly what the role of a team manager is. I guess if you could just outline that for us and how you came to be a team manager for England and Great Britain hockey.
Well, the role of the team manager, I can see the others smirking on this call already, because I'm no doubt that they will contribute to what I actually do. But I think it's everything. It's looking after performance, but it's everything off the pitch. So the planning of trips, all the logistical arrangements away from the hockey. I also have a role on the bench, which is keeping everybody calm, running the substitutions, liaising with technical officials and umpires. So I guess that sort of covers it. But I suppose over the years that my role with this group has evolved because, you know, I've been working. I was thinking about this. I actually reckon I've spent more time with these two guys than I have with my wife over the last 15 years. So it began for us, for I guess the three of us in Prague in 2006, I think, at the European Championships with the under-21s. And I started to learn the role there, then got involved with the senior group. The first tournament I went to with the senior group was 2010 World Cup in Delhi, and I've been ever present since. So it's actually we've been working together, the three of us, for 15 years, would you believe?
Yeah, and you know, as Andy kind of highlighted, the role takes on kind of multiple, you know, kind of bits on and off. But I think over the years, while some of it has changed, like Andy's talked about, it does still remain the same. Because I can still remember on that first trip having Dixie as a roommate. And Andy coming in to say everything all right with the bed situation, as we were both sharing a double bed on the first night. At which point we kind of said, not totally ideal, and don't worry, I'll sort it. 2 weeks later, we were still in the double bed. And you fast forward to India, I think it was 2015. Obviously, 2 days of travelling to get to the hotel, check in the room. This time I'm with Mikey Hoare, and again, most of the rooms have got double beds. And I have to say, Mikey Hoare, you know, can talk even more than I can. That, you know, the thought of sharing a double bed with him for 2 weeks. But Andy had progressed by this point, and you know, luckily it was only 2 nights in a double bed with Mikey that time. But yeah, some stuff changes, but some stuff still remains the same throughout the years.
You know, it's great to start off with a really positive thing. George, I mean, I can't believe that you haven't. I'd forgotten that. And you obviously haven't, and it's obviously still an issue there. But you know, my door is always open. You can always talk to me about these things.
I'm still scarred from that 2 weeks sharing a bed with George. I think we forget it was about 40 degrees in Prague that summer, and for 2 weeks, 6 foot, you know, 4 bloke and me, 5'8", curled up beside him.
Yeah, he took up way more than his fair share.
But yeah, I think maybe Andy slightly undersold himself on some of his roles as well, because I think there's definitely like a pastoral side to what Andy does, and is one of his massive strengths. And I think I maybe take that for granted because, and maybe George so a little bit too, but because we have been together for so long. But for some of the newer guys coming into the group, I won't mention their names, but I think they do sort of make it a bit cheesy, but look up to Andy as a bit of a father figure at times. And when all the pressure of selection and those types of things that come with hand in hand with high performance sport, it's nice to have that human side within the ranks. And yeah, I've definitely really appreciated that over the years, Andy.
Well, I guess I've learned that from, well, as you know, I was a copper for 30 odd years. And I think, you know, many of the skills that I learned as a police officer throughout that long career, I bring into this role. And I think the two are quite similar. I think, you know, one of the things that I think is really important is the ability to be able to communicate effectively with those around you. And also, you know, emotional intelligence, you develop that, you get to know players, you get to know what makes different players tick in different ways. You have in the back of your mind how people get on with each other within the group. You know, also all those sorts of things I think contribute to what you're saying there, Adam. And the more that you're with a group of people, the more you're able to, you know, look at little signals and observe the group. You know, I now think I could turn around and say I could guess when George is having his good and his bad days. I think we probably all can, because he tends to be quite quiet on his bad days. But no,
yeah.
But on a serious note, I think that the emotional intelligence, the ability to read people, and the other thing, it's interesting you mentioned that pastoral side, Adam, because I think one of the great strengths of a manager, and I've learned this, is the ability to remain calm, remain focused when all around you is mayhem. And maybe mayhem is a little bit of an over expression, but when we're under pressure, you know, I think people look to me to bring some calm, to bring some, you know, this guy's okay, he's under pressure, but he's acting in a cool, calm manner. We're all okay. You know, I think you guys might remember this. We went on a trip, I think it was 2013, it was the World League, but it was a World Cup qualifier, and we had a holding camp in Singapore. And we were going to hop across, we were going to have about 10 days in Singapore, I think, and then hop across to Johor Bahru in Malaysia to play the qualifier. When we landed in Singapore, it was like a sort of pea souper in London in the 1950s, if you remember. There was this thick wood smoke that had come from the Indonesian forests that they were burning. And Bobby Crutchley, who was obviously then the coach, I think we trained once and realised that this was not going to work. So we had to literally pick up the whole group, kit, staff, athletes, everything. When we realised that this wood smoke was starting to get into the hotel air conditioning, pick up the whole group and transport them to Kuala Lumpur. And this was sort of an overnight thing. So, right, tomorrow we're going to Kuala Lumpur. We'd no hotel organised, we'd no training venue, we were just moving the whole group. And I think when you think about that and trying to remain calm, and because, you know, behind the scenes, there was a heck of a lot going on that trip. So that's one of my memories that I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, you can't stop at the Malaysian services that we stopped at and not be scarred for life by what we saw when we stopped for, you know, the 6-hour drive up from Singapore. It's the small things that stay in the memory.
It wasn't quite Gloucester services, was it?
No, it wasn't. No, it's not South Mims. No, Andy's actually selling himself, you know, again, being the humble person he is. That was literally a disaster. Like, the group had only been together, I think, 4 or 5 weeks. The turnaround from the London squad was huge. Bob had, you know, planned this really good preparation in Singapore, and we arrive and it's just chaos. And as I said, I remember the smoke getting in the rooms and training that first day, and to be able to, like, on the spot, like, literally organise getting up to KL, staying in hotels, training in hotels, training at the pitch. Single beds, may I add, at this place, so that was a massive success on late notice. But no, like those type of challenges that throw up the whole time, Andy always deals with it, like I said, in such a calm manner. And I think equally important in it is bringing humour. Like the job, I say job, we're not in a job. The job Andy used to do before, obviously, really serious life and death to a degree. And I think the kind of perspective he's brought across from that into this role has been really important. And I think, like Dixie said, it's not just the pastoral care, but ultimately you have coaches that decide whether you're getting picked or not. A lot of stress on them. And I think Andy's slightly removed from that. Like, he's not picking the team. He's not critiquing you as a player and these type of things, which I think makes it easier, therefore, for him sometimes to kind of have a closer relationship with the players or kind of bring that humour. Going back to Prague, for example, I remember that trip. Dixie probably remember it as well. It didn't go particularly well. I think we were kind of knocked out in the group stages early on, and performance director at the time, basically junior performance director, arrived at the hotel, said, "Lads, this is probably the last time a lot of you will play for England. I'm getting a flight home tomorrow, so if you'd like to speak to Bob about it, feel free." So, like, there's players who are like,
"Hand grenade."
Yeah. But Andy being Andy, I remember that because, next day, obviously, a bit of a mood in the camp. We're doing the ice baths, which everybody hates. And Tim Deacon, a Northern lad who was in the squad, Andy bringing some humour to the situation, had cleverly moulded a Mars bar into the shape of a poo. And he had carefully placed it in the ice bar to help bring a bit of humour to the scenario, and slightly accused Tim Deacon of, "Tim, what have you done in the ice bath?" Usually this joke would be brilliant, but Tim Deacon just picked it up and went, "Oh, it's a melted Mars bar." And I think he tucked in. But that's like what Andy does. And as I said, I don't want to play down all the other stuff, but I think being able to be a human and bring some humour into quite stressful times, and to keep reminding everyone that what we do is meant to be fun is such a massive part of the squad, and helping us to stay as consistent as possible.
Yeah, really a clear example from me as to how much the group respect Andy and his position and what he does for the group was, sorry to bring it up, Andy, but the news around Andy not being able to travel with the GB team to the Rio Olympics. And we had a meeting at Bisham Abbey, and again, I won't mention any names other than myself, but most people were in tears because it was such a big blow to the team, like how we just couldn't envisage an Olympic Games without Andy being present. And I know it hit Andy quite hard, but it maybe affected the team more than we perhaps realised at the time and during those games. So, I'm hopefully getting selected for Tokyo, and I'm hoping to make this the first experience alongside Andy at Olympics. I'm really looking forward to it.
And I could feel myself getting quite emotional you saying those words, Adam. It was an emotional time, and I was, and for those people that don't know, I was involved in an incident where I worked with CO19 for 18 years. In the Metropolitan Police, my team were involved in an incident where an innocent man was fatally wounded. He happened to be a Brazilian national, and that had an impact on whether or not I was going to travel to the Olympic Games, obviously in Rio in Brazil. And we found out some months before that I wasn't traveling, and I announced that to the squad, as Adam has mentioned. But I was just so. I remember being very emotional, and I'm not a particularly emotional person, but in that situation, I felt this unequivocal support from the staff and the athletes around not being able to go, and it really, really made me feel part of that group. And it was tough. That whole sort of 6 or 8 months. I did a little bit of work with Sarah Orchard on 5 Live throughout the Olympic Games, but that period was actually really very, very difficult for me. But knowing that I had the support of the group made it much easier. And of course, what made it worse was that we didn't do very well. And then we had, of course, the women winning gold. It was just, there was so much sweet and sour about that whole period. Very, very difficult. And Adam, of course, you're right. You were, I think you were away surfing, weren't you, 2012?
Yeah, I had to get away.
Yeah. And that's sort of understandable. I think probably a lot of people, what they don't know is everything that goes on behind the scenes around, so Olympic selection. We're in this period now where Olympic selection for athletes and in some ways staff is such a difficult period, because what I think generally sort of Joe public, for want of a better phrase, don't understand is this is not just about what's happening in July and August. It's what's happened over the last number of years. And it's also about what's happening beyond the Olympic Games and the ability to plan your career post that. So, these periods around Olympics, I think the skills that you've mentioned around reading the room, being genuine, bringing humour, making sure it's appropriate humour throughout this sort of period is really important.
I think also just before we as well, and going back to it, the person Andy is obviously had that disappointment like Dix. I remember being so upset, that Andy wasn't going to be involved in it. It hit a lot of us hard. It'd be very easy to kind of take yourself away from that environment, kind of, I'm not going to be involved, so in the run up, I'm, almost going to step back because I'm not going to be there. Instead, Andy kind of almost leaned in further in that run up to it. I remember helping Crampo, our psych, step up to the role, but also we went away for probably, I'd say, the most important or the best 3 days of that cycle up to Derbyshire, and Andy, along with Crampo, organised this brilliant kind of 3-day trip, working on like leadership skills, followership, like getting us together as a team, and that was really good fun. Brought in some of his old colleagues, walking on, I'm not sure what they're called, but the Derbyshire Moors.
The Peak District.
The Peak District, walking there, pitch black, doing a search exercise that Andy's brought across from his previous job, and finding one of his mates, Water Lily, hiding under a camouflage mat.
Oh God, I forgot about that.
Task at 11:30 at night, and then telling us we're going to do a surveillance exercise, that's going to require us to all stay up through the night. Getting Huddo, the S&C coach, next about 6 cups of coffee, getting so serious. At which point, Andy tells us, don't worry, it's off. They've caught the guy, and Huddo's completely wired on coffee for the next however long. But this whole 3 days really stimulated some really honest and open conversation within the group, really brought us closer. And as I said, it's just a fantastic example of, having disappointment, but actually, leaning in and, putting that almost to side and doing what he could do to give us the best chance of doing well. And that really, highlighted that to me. And I think the other thing I'd say as well, not just players and staff, what the role Andy's provided, I think, over the last few years is a link with family as well. I'm incredibly lucky, like my parents, brother, have come to all around the world to watch me and have been in a position to do that. And, a lot of other people's families try to do that as often as possible. And it can sometimes be the forgotten part of this. Like when we're young, they drive us everywhere. Suddenly you're a senior international, and I think it's easy for the parents to get forgotten about or pushed aside, whereas actually the financial commitment of these guys travelling to Australia, to a Commonwealth Games, or Dixie's parents came out to India just recently for the World Cup. That's a big commitment, and actually that is huge for us as players, being able to look into the stands and see our family and, to be supported. And Andy's always done a fantastic job. And I know my parents are incredibly grateful for the role he's played in making them feel like part of the team as well. Like, especially as players, we can be so ungrateful, and it's easy to forget that Andy's done a brilliant job over the years of kind of not just bringing the team together, but the wider team that goes beyond staff and players and family.
I think, and I think Michaela Smith has got to take, a lot of credit for that as well. I think it's something that we do much better now than maybe we have done in the past. It's interesting you say that, George, because I can remember some slightly uncomfortable experiences with the under-21s, where actually I think the approach of friends, relatives is a bit different as a senior international than if you're in the under-21s. And you know, I remember walking into sort of clubhouses in Holland and Belgium and Spain almost with a bit of dread, because you know, somebody is going to come up to me and say, why did my boy only play 35 minutes, you know, at one side, and you should be picking so-and-so should be flicking corners. And actually, I think once we get into the senior group, you know, I think that, now I'm not saying that anybody's friends or relatives on this call were like that, but there were certainly a few experiences where I would sort of walk into a clubhouse abroad and see people would almost be making a beeline for me, and I'd sort of turn around and walk out the other way. But yeah, I think it's a really important part, George, and you know, I'm so disappointed that that nobody is going to be out in Tokyo, and you know, it almost feels as if there's a big part missing, because you know, as we all know, friends, wives, girlfriends, relatives, you know, the whole, it is so important to us as a group that we embrace everybody. It's all part of the culture.
Subscribe to Inside the Circle the podcast now on all of your usual podcast providers. One thing I wanted to touch upon, Andy, is I guess, has the role changed much since you first did it in comparison to now? And if so, what are the biggest things that have changed for you?
The role changes with the head coach. So depending, so that, you know, the head coach calls the shots. The manager's role is not necessarily set in stone. So whoever the head coach is really makes the call on what you do. I think Danny. So Danny is quite different to Bobby in what he expects from the head coach. So it varies from head coach to head coach. Has it evolved? It's evolved certainly with technology, and there are certain things that haven't evolved. A washing machine is still a washing machine. So you know, when I do wash the kit, that hasn't changed at all, Will, funnily enough. But things like, so we have an app that we use for the substitutions now. It always used to be done on pen and paper when I began, and we would sit there. I'd sit there with David Bunyan, who was one of the former assistant coaches within GB, and I'd sit there the evening after a game, and we would go through the game with a fine tooth comb and go through all the stats, and I would be recording all the stats on a bit of paper as he would be watching the game and reading them out. Things have changed now. You know, Andy Halliday, our analyst now, really takes care of that side of it. So I think there are certain things that have changed with technology. Has my role changed? I guess when you get more involved and when people get to know you more, you become more aware of what they can and can't do and the skills that they bring. So, you know, one of the things that people probably won't understand is I have my international umpiring badge. People from the MPUA take note. I've umpired a couple of international indoor games. I've umpired many international outdoor games, including probably the most feisty outdoor international game, certainly of my career. It was the Great Britain versus Pinnacle club side from Holland at the end of our South African Olympic preparation trip. I umpired the game on my own. So I ran around like a sort of blue ass fly for 70 minutes. And here we had a Dutch team who were really, really trying to prove that these sort of put these Olympic hopefuls into their place. I think there were several yellow cards. It wasn't an easy game to umpire. So there's that side of it as well, Will. You know, I take my whistle to every training session, and I'm normally called upon to help out.
Substitutions is something I was very keen to ask about, actually, because I remember there was a women's friendly at Bisham a couple of years ago, and a colleague of mine was asked to help out with the substitutions, and they play hockey, so they thought, oh, it'll be a breeze. They were a broken woman after that game. How I guess, like, from the outside you don't really notice, but because of the nature of hockey with the rolling subs, how difficult is it, and have there been any occasions where it's maybe gone slightly awry?
Yes, there have been a couple of occasions where it's gone slightly awry. It's one of these things. It's a bit like driving. So when you start, you're aware of everything. Accelerator, clutch, steering wheel, mirror, all these. The more that you drive, the more you become accustomed to your surroundings. It's the same with substitution. So firstly, knowing the players and their capabilities, operating the app, making sure that you've got a penalty corner routine on the pitch, but also looking at having certain players on at certain times. You keep the rotations going. It's something that you develop a little bit like being a copper, I guess. You develop a bit of a sixth sense around it. So I pretty much now know the players, and I get guidance sort of before the game, after the game from Danny. But during the game, unless there's something really important to ask, so it could be that we have to move people across different lines on the pitch. I will probably ask Danny that question, but the rest of the time he lets me crack on with the subs. There's a famous situation, George, I'm sure will remember this, because I think we nearly conceded a goal where we had 10 on against Australia in the World Cup in The Hague. That was certainly one, and it was, the responsibility always stops with the manager, but it was a player.
Don't blame the players.
No, I'm not going to name any names.
Unfortunately, we've managed to get 10 on. We've yet to successfully get 12 on, which is what we aspire to do, having seen the benefits of that. But the numbers thing is interesting, though, and it is the players' fault, because obviously there was a couple of high-profile moments in the World Cup in 2014 with various numbers on the pitch. But I don't think anyone had ever seen that before. And then you go to the Commonwealth Games, and it happened twice in there, like with other teams. And I think it's one of these where everyone always just assumes there's 11 on the pitch. It became massively highlighted. And so you've then got TDs constantly counting. And funnily enough, weird numbers are found to be on the pitch, because when you change 6 players in one go, like, luckily it changed in indoor. But, when Andy was indoor coach, you even had the goalie running on and off, like, at that time. So, how he keeps on track of it, sometimes is quite incredible. But
and you had players getting locked in toilets in indoor. Do you remember Richard Springham?
Yeah, so there's an interesting couple of, nothing to do with substitutions here, Will, but there's an interesting couple of memories I have around, firstly, because I coached the indoor team for, 10 years, I guess, and men and women towards the end. And we were at a World Cup qualifier in Poland, in Poznan, and we were playing Sweden, I think, in a game that we had to win by one or two clear goals to qualify for the World Cup. And half-time, quite tense. We're doing all right, quite tense. And half-time, we go into a changing room, which is literally next to the pitch. And we come out, start the second half, and I'm sitting there. I'm coach, by the way, at this point. I'm not sitting there with my iPad as manager. And I sit there and hang on, we've only got 5 on. Where is Richard Springham? And he's not on the bench. And we look at the changing room, and the door handle is going up and down and he has inadvertently been locked in the changing room at half time, and we're about to start the second half with only 5 players. So that was one. It's all about the number of players on the pitch. The other one that is quite famous because it focused on BBC Breakfast Television, where I became the laughing stock because the buck stops with the manager. I was the laughing stock of BBC Breakfast TV. Was the test event in 2012 at London. And bearing in mind, it's a test event, and I'll keep saying that, a test event. So because in the Olympic Games and in international hockey, people don't realise it's not like football where you go off, you have a cup of tea and an orange, you amble on for the beginning of the second half. It's a strict 10 minutes in international hockey. And if you are not on the pitch, the game will start. So they tried to invoke this for the test event. Now, unbeknown to us, the walk from the pitch at Lee Valley, the Riverbank Arena, to the changing room was quite a long one. So I asked one of the hockey makers, I said, look, can you knock on the door and give us 3 minutes so that we know, when to come out after half time. So there was a knock on the door, and we ambled out. The knock on the door was actually 2 minutes, not 3 minutes. So what we ended up with was, I think, 8 players on the pitch at the beginning of the second half against Germany. Germany had the ball for the pushback. And what do you expect the Germans would do? Would they stand back and let us get our 11 back on? No, they run straight down and score. And this, of course, features on BBC Breakfast Sport the following morning. And, the buck stops here. So it was very much my fault. And so there's 2 occasions there with where not having the right numbers of people on the pitch. Let's just keep everything crossed that over the next 4 or 5 months, we have 11 on.
Yeah, I think the only good news is I don't think we actually have another formal test event, because we don't have a great history at test events when it comes to certain other bits. Because obviously Glasgow, they had a big test event before the Commonwealth Games. I think it was us, Scotland, South Africa, Argentina playing. We had a little incident there as well, didn't we, Andy?
Yeah, we did, George, which,
I think that must have made BBC Breakfast. If it didn't, it should have done.
The buck very much stops with the manager once again. So important, Will, that you realise that this team need their snacks, and it's important to refuel immediately after a game. So one of the sort of habits we got into was we would take a toaster with us, not a pop-up toaster. One of these, you put a couple of layers of bread, bit of cheese in the middle, or whatever, a bit of ham. You close the toaster shut, plug it in, switch it on. 8 minutes later, there you go. You've got a lovely little toasty. So we had this in the changing room in Scotland. Now, this is the thing that people don't know, is that unbeknown to us, the day before, there had been a fire alarm go off in the same changing room. And people forget this. So there we are after our game on a Saturday afternoon. The next game is just about to start on the main pitch. We're in the changing rooms, and somebody has decided they'll have a toasty, and the toaster's switched on. And next thing, all the alarms are going off. All the fire alarms in the building are going off in the venue. And obviously, the local fire brigade are on their way. It's all kicked off. And in fact, one of the things I do remember, George, was you wandering out into the middle of the pitch dressed in just a towel.
Well, this is the thing we found out, that whilst whoever writes the fire safety plan at these various venues, it might seem a good idea that the safe meeting point would be in the middle of the open pitch. And on a normal day, that would be fine. But when South Africa are about to kick off against Scotland, having the fire safety point in the centre circle is a slight issue, as you've got English players coming out in their towels, 2 teams lined up ready to play, and all the spectators kind of coming into the centre of the pitch. So I assume, Glasgow Green have, reconsidered that as their meeting point at the tournament.
The thing that I would point out, though, George, is that I reckon you had 3 or 4 seconds to put a pair of trousers on and a top. But you did insist on going out there with just that large towel, or maybe a slightly smaller towel.
Well, yeah, good. But Andy's very hot on towels as well. Don't get him started on hotel towels. If not, we'll never finish this in time for the second episode.
I have a thing about theft, Will. People leaving towels in hotels. That and wearing the wrong undershorts. Don't get on the wrong side of me. But no, that was another test event incident, which, funnily enough, well, a lot of flack. Well, Scotland, England. We're in Scotland. We're not greatest friends, and I think they enjoyed rubbing our noses in it a little bit after that incident, because it was, the English have set the fire alarms off. So we made a donation to the local fire brigade, to their charity, and the pre-match music for the rest of that tournament it varied from I'm a Fire Starter by the Prodigy, followed by a bit of Earth, Wind and Fire. The fire theme just stayed with us throughout the rest of that tournament, and we were not allowed to forget it.
It's amazing as well, isn't it, that when someone's called out, you give them some money, which arguably is reimbursed them for their time, but you can still phrase it as a donation. So, that's also incredible, the way we managed to wrangle that one.
Thank you to Andy, George and Adam for joining us and sharing just a small selection of the many memories they've shared together. They're back for even more as the second series of Inside the Circle the podcast comes to a conclusion next week, with yet more insights into the role of a team manager. In the meantime, make sure you've liked, rated and subscribed on all of your usual podcast providers.